for the evaluation meeting. So Cedar has attempted to incorporate the following elements of Ron's feedback. 1, don't stand in front of the stinking camera. 2, we know who evaluated this too. Just by the notes. 2, help the audience better understand how this first job impacted her. 3, provide better prompt transitions to not bring the audience back into the room. And 2 additional improvements Cedar identified and is attempting to achieve. 1 is to provide a summary at the end to not end so abruptly. And 2 is to explain the oyster growing steps more succinctly. Okay, so are you ready for round 2? All right. Fellow Toastmasters, what was your first job? Tonight, Cedar will give us a glimpse into her first job with her speech titled Cedar the Seeder, spelled S-E-E-D-E-R. First jobs impact us all. We will hear about the impact Cedar's had on her and learn how to farm oysters on the Oregon coast at the same time. Please help me to welcome Cedar Simmons, aka Cedar the Seeder.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster and Toastmasters and guests, Cindy, hi, and Jen. To be fair to Ron, that was a paraphrase. He didn't say don't stand in front of the stinking camera. I just have to get that out of the way. that was my words, not his. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about my first job at Umpqua Aquaculture. Umpqua Triangle Oysters is what we call it. And I started there when I was 13, and my dad was the farm manager, and he got me the gig, and eventually he became part owner. So this job has been a part of my life for a long time. Since I was 13, I fell in love for the first time working at this job when I was 17. My husband and I, not the same person that I fell in love with, my husband was different, worked there together about 8 years later, and a few years after that, I got banned from the oyster farm. That's a different speech. I'm not going to talk about that tonight. That's a very different story, but and then during COVID, the farm actually burned down. The building burned down, and this is when my dad still owns it. And the farm building burned almost completely to the ground, and they were shut down for a while. And during COVID, they got back up and running. And actually, Jen and I, we helped them get back up and running, and we restarted the selling oysters to the public at that time. So I worked there all through high school, summers, weekends, and in college even. So this has really been a part of my life for a long time. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about 3 things. Really, where this farm is, growing oysters, and processing oysters. We're going to start with where this thing is. It's on the Oregon coast. Processing oysters, shuck them, and do shell stock, and then a little bit more about growing oysters, which is where the Cedar comes in, and we'll explain that. This, like I said, it's on the Oregon coast. It's kind of due west of Eugene, a little bit south of there, north of Bandon, the Gulf, Bandon Dunes. It's about in that general area, and we have a non-ending lease from the Army Corps of Engineers to lease this part of the water that it's a triangle. The 2 jetties come together with the shore, and it forms a triangle. It's about 65 acres of water, but it equates to about 200 acres of mud flats. And when I first started working there, I learned everything there is about farming oysters, harvesting, bringing them in from the water, taking the oysters from the shell and shucking them or making shell stock. And from there you can sort them to size, either from in the shells or out of the shells. And there was a lot of people working there when I was in high school, and it was very intimidating at first, being really little and not knowing what to do, but I kind of grew into my space. Growing oysters, let's talk about that. So what we do is we buy the spat, the baby oysters, and there's about 1 million of them in a golf ball, just the size of a golf ball. 1 million little baby oysters. And we take these tubs, they look like hot tubs, they always look like hot tubs to me, and we fill about 2 or 3 of these big hot tubs with old oyster shell, that's called culch. And we pump bay water in there, and we heat them, and we circulate to oxygenate the water really well. And we put the spat in these tubs, and we let them circulate. And what they do is the baby oysters have their own natural ballast, and they swim around and they attach themselves to these the culch, the old oysters shell. And about after 3 days, we take those out to the farm, the triangle, and they grow. And about after a month, we bring them back in and seed them. And that's where Cedar the Seeder comes in. And this is an example of what we do to seed oysters. It's just the old oyster shells, and at this point, the babies are on there. And our farm is a long line farm. So this is an example of one of the ropes, but it's truncated. Normally they're about 12 feet long. And we have curtains of these ropes that attach themselves to long lines that are parallel, like long in the water. And then at each end of the long line, there's 2 buoys. So these are just hanging in the water. Okay, and then they grow out in clusters, and that's when we bring them back in and process them. So I used to stand there 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, seeding oysters. It's very meditative work. There's a hip action to it, taking apart these polypropylene ropes and putting these shells in there, and I'm really very fast at it. And I learned by doing this job, I really wanted to go to college. I did not want to do this for the rest of my life. But my dad is still working at the oyster farm, and Ron challenged me to say more about how this job impacted me. And what I realized, I'm starting to tear up. What I realized through this process is that my father raised me, and working there and having the opportunity to be around him and help him, it was just another opportunity to figure out a way to make him really proud of me. And that's what I really realized through this, giving this presentation and going through this development of this speech, and anything to make him proud of me. So tonight we've talked a little bit about my formative years. You've hopefully learned a little bit more about how this job has impacted me, and how now you can all go farm oysters on the Oregon coast and grow them and become seeders yourself. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Cedar. If we were in a contest,